Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 64 of Show Reviewers. Today we'll be going over season 4, episode 5 of Invincible. Now, this episode was utterly phenomenal. Like, it's the best of the season by far. Like, it's even better than episode 2. And it honestly, it's one of the best in the entire like series, hands down. Like, this episode was phenomenal. So just briefly get into the story. So we pick up where we left off with Nolan and Alan pulling up to Earth so that they can recruit Mark. So we see as Nolan and Mark are talking, and eventually Nolan gets Mark to agree to go and help him with the war of the coalition of planets against the Viltrumites. So ultimately he agrees, but then he's talking with Mark and he is expressing his desire to apologize to Debbie because he does feel legitimate remorse, but Mark's like, this is stupid, you don't need to do this because you're doing it for yourself and not for Debbie. But he ultimately ends up deciding to do so. So he ends up and going, and we kind of see like Alan and Eve briefly talking while Mark and Nolan are speaking, but it isn't nothing really important comes from it. He's just showing a picture of his dog, and that's like a dog cat alien thing. But then we see as Nolan tries to decide whether or not to apologize to Debbie, and he just can't. Ultimately, he can't bring himself to do it. However, when he's about to leave, Debbie opens the door, and ultimately Nolan ends up going in. So we see as he apologizes for everything, and Debbie obviously gets very jaded, very heated, and she starts to get like mad at Nolan. She starts yelling at him, and we see that Nolan is obviously apologetic, but Debbie, I mean, he has done horrendous things to Debbie and to the planet. So as she most certainly expounds upon, but so she is reasonably enraged, and we see as she punches Nolan in the chest multiple times, and I thought this was like insane. We see as he's punching him, her knuckles like start cracking open, and she has to bleed, and then she has to go heal her hand and all that, but or bandage her hand up and all that, which I found to be insane. Okay, so are you telling me that Nolan, though he is a human, has a rigidity similar to that of a brick wall or a regular wall? Like, what? He's a living, flesh-made being, but punching him legit leads to the same results as he would like punching a brick wall. Like, that's what it was. She only punched him like 3 times, and her like knuckle was torn up. Like, what? Like, I would expect him to at least have like a flesh sense of like, yes, strong rigidity and durability, but not like actual like rigidity from that durability. But apparently Nolan has actual rigidity from that durability because she scraped her knuckles on him, which I thought would be insane. Like Omni-man feet, but or Nolan feet. But yeah, so we see as this goes along, and then ultimately he ends up going to Art, and him and Art have a couple of beers, and they just kind of discuss things. Nolan ultimately asks Art about Paul, and he reveals that Paul's kind of an ordinary dude, but he's good for Debbie, and that the kids like him and all that stuff. And we see that Nolan says that he's glad for him and all that, but we can obviously tell that Nolan does miss Debbie and that he truly loves Debbie. And that's, I mean, Debbie was the one who caused him to change, what made it so hard for him to ultimately leave Earth and be unable to kill Mark, because she made him no longer a Viltrumite. But yeah, so we see this, and ultimately we see as we have Mark, Debbie, and Oliver, and we see as Oliver comes in, and Mark reveals how he's going to space, and Oliver gets to talking with him. He's like, I have as much of a desire to and as much of a right to save my planet as you do. So ultimately, Debbie and Mark agree to allow Oliver to go to space with Mark. And so we kind of see later on as they all kind of say their goodbyes, we see as they have one last supper as a family with Eve, Oliver, Mark, Debbie, and Paul. And they all have a little nice heartwarming supper before everyone heads off, and they say their goodbyes and all that. And then we see as they go and eventually hop on the Venture, which is Alan and what's her name, Talia's ship. And well, was that purple guy's ship until he got kicked off as captain. That's what I say. Purple guy FNAF reference? No. But, yeah, so we see as this happens, and then they ultimately get on, and then as as I keep calling him Omni-man, but as Nolan comes to see Mark, and oh yeah, I forgot to mention. But during all of this, we see as Alan actually goes to recruit Tech Jacket. Now, Tech Jacket was the Geldarian who was on Earth, and I previously discussed in, I believe it was episode 2, when they were looking for a Geldarian, and they learned that one was actually on Earth, so they went and recruited Tech Jacket. And so she ultimately ends up joining them, and she goes to the Venture as well. But then we see as Nolan is greeting Mark and Oliver as they get on the Venture, and as he sees that Oliver's on there, he starts to like freak out. He's like, you should have not brought him. I don't want to see him suffer because of me and all that stuff, or be around me and possibly suffer due to it. And Mark's like, you're just doing this for yourself again, and we need him because he's actually an asset now. He's grown up, and he's a powerful being in his own right. Yeah, so we see if they all kind of settle in like the common room of the adventure. They all kind of start like I guess communing and all that. And we see that Tech Jacket, or her name's actually Zoe. We see as Zoe and Oliver start to kick it off a little bit because they're similar ages, so they start becoming friends. And we just kind of see as they hang around, do their things. We see as at one point Nolan goes to get this like pasta-looking dish, and he has a flashback of when he was with Debbie and a date. And yeah, so ultimately they're traveling along through space, heading back to Telestria, or yeah, Telestria. Yeah, that's the planet, and they were the coalition of planets is based in. But during this, they are ultimately attacked, and they were attacked by a Viltrumite cruiser. And this causes the ship to blow up and all that. And luckily, the like head portion of the ship is able to escape off, but the portion in which Oliver, Tank Jacket, Alan, Nolan, and Mark were in was ultimately destroyed. And we see as three Viltrumites come out. We see Cred, not Craig, but we see Cred, Lucan, and Conquest. So we see as they all start fighting. Mark is kind of surprised to see Conquest alive because I don't believe he actually knew about Conquest being stored on Earth, in which Conquest escaped, so he obviously didn't know about that either. But yeah, so we see as the fight begins. Now, this fight is really good, but yeah, we kind of see him fight about, and we kind of see as Oliver goes up against Conquest, one of the earlier parts of the fight, because they're all kind of just going about fighting whoever for a while. And we see, I'm just going to predominantly focus on Conquest because he's the big bad of this. But we see as Oliver goes against Conquest, but he's putting the hands on him. He's speeding around him, doing all that stuff, but eventually Conquest catches him. He's like about to crush his skull, and then Nolan comes out of nowhere. I was freaking out. I was like, oh, we are about to have a Nolan and Conquest fight. Like, that would have been so sick to see. But yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, we're about to have a Nolan versus Conquest fight. Like, I was ready to see this, because I was ready to see if Nolan could put the hands on Conquest. Because, I mean, look at what Mark did. I mean, yes, Mark got pieced up when he was on Earth, but, like, Nolan's quite a marginally more powerful than Mark is. Because, I mean, he's older, and Viltrumite strength usually raises on, like, seniority, but it also can be measured in just, like, pure experience and physical strength and all that, by training. Yeah, we don't actually get to see too much of this, because ultimately Invincible, or Mark, ends up coming in, fighting more with Conquest. But yeah, so we see as this fight continues, we see as Alan and Tank Jacket are kind of fighting about and all that. We see as Tank Jacket almost gets killed because her like optical thing was destroyed, and she wasn't able to see. But also, if you wonder why I'm referring to Tank Jacket as she actually got gender swapped in the animation. But I mean, it's not a big thing. But yeah. So we see as she gets her thing destroyed, but Alan comes in and saves her, and we just kind of see more of the fighting between all of the Viltrumites and the people. And ultimately, we see at one point as Oliver gets punched in the stomach, I believe it's Lucan, and Omni-man comes in, gets him out of the way, and he looks at Oliver, and he's like, "You need air?" And Oliver's like, "Yeah." So he sends him to a planet which coincidentally had good breathable oxygen, but he sends him over to that planet. And as he's going there, Conquest and Mark are fighting. Like, Conquest is like, "I'm gonna kill your brother." So he goes and flies after Oliver, and Oliver, he gets there and he gets his breath, and then we see Conquest come out of nowhere looking like this right here, like he's about to spike a volleyball. Like, this was like the most aura panel and like aura scene in all of Invincible, because he looks like he's about to just like smite Oliver. Like, it was so sick. Like, you'll see it in the thumbnail, because that's most certainly going to be in the thumbnail, because that was such a sick scene. Like, I literally released, I'm not even joking, I released a verbal exclamation. I went, because it was so sick, it was so hype. Like, I was like, oh my god, Oliver's about to die. But yeah, so we see this, but luckily Mark ends up coming out of nowhere and blasting Conquest out of the way. But we see as Oliver's kind of recuperating, and then we get to see literally one of the best, if not the best fight in all of Invincible so far. Like, it had the best, like, just fighting in general, and honestly some of the best animation you'll see from Invincible. I really like how it was stylized and all that, because, like, I mean, Invincible's not really known for its animation. This was some good animation. Like, it's not Mappa level, but it was very satisfying to me, at least. We see him just throwing down. We see actually Mark has the upper hand, like he did in space, like most of the time. And he's doing pretty good throughout all of this, and ultimately he starts getting a Conquest and like a stranglehold. And Conquest having trouble dealing with it. He's punching Mark in the ribs and all that. They go flying around, slamming into the ground and all that stuff. And we just kind of see him duking it out, just like hardcore. And Mark is just predominantly focusing on strangling Conquest, because he has to kill Conquest, because he feels so much animosity toward him and all that. And it's just all culminating because, I mean, he killed Eve and all that. So the animosity is culminating with his grip around Conquest's throat. And they're throwing down. And ultimately, they end up getting beat up a little bit more, and we ultimately see as Omni-man realizes that Conquest and Mark are both down there, so he ends up going and looking for Oliver. But yeah, we just kind of see they're fighting more, and then ultimately Mark is able to get the upper hand on Conquest, and he's holding him on the ground. He's got him in a stranglehold down there. Like, we're like, okay, Conquest is about to get folded. Like, we better see a Mark W. And then Conquest spears him with his hand. Mark becomes a daggone skewer. He pushes his hand through bro's abdomen, and he starts ripping out the large chest. Like, he's not ripping, but he's like, okay, so you ever like pulled at something with a rope? He's doing this right here, just slowly removing Mark's large intestine, which I really thought was a cool, like, okay, I gotta admit, this scene, I'm not a very queasy person. Like, I've never really got queasy at anything. It messed with me a little bit, because it was a gnarly scene. We see as he's slowly removing Mark's intestines, and, like, honestly, like, the realism of the scene, because I believe the large intestine stretches up to, like, 30 foot, so it was cool to see as this was realistically done, as he just slowly pulled Mark's intestines out, like, about a foot at a time. So yeah, that was gnarly. But ultimately we see as Mark does not lose his hold, even though he's like wailing in agony. He's not wailing, but he's like gasping in agony as he's holding down on Conquest's throat. And he's just holding, and then ultimately we see as Conquest's eyes go into the back of his head, and we presume that Conquest is finally dead. And we just see as he almost like pulled all of Mark's large intestines out. And ultimately we see as Omni-man, or Nolan, pulls up on Oliver, and he's like, where's Mark? And Oliver's like, they were moving too fast, I couldn't see, because they were moving, they were boogieing, they were slamming into things. Like, you can see like the desolation laid out after this happens. But yeah, so we see this, and ultimately they go over and they see the pile of viscera, and they see as Conquest is on top of Mark, and Conquest dead, but Mark on the verge of death. Now, while all this was happening, we also see as Alan and Zoe, or Tech Jacket, they ultimately ended up having to run away from Lucan and Cred, because they were kind of getting the ropes thrown on them, but they ultimately end up going and they hide. And we actually get to see in the end credit scene where they hid. They hid in this little pod thing that was a Gildarian like war bunker that Zoe had put on the bottom of the ship, and this will now allow them to get transported wherever they are now. They're talking about it, like, where will we be going? Because during this, we did see as like a bunch of troopers came out and were shooting at them, and that's kind of why it led to like a more difficulty to find why Mark and them had to leave the area, because they were getting shot at by these foot soldiers, and that's kind of what made them, Alan and Take Jacket, start to lose a little bit against the Viltrum Knights. And we see as they kind of discuss like, where are we going to go, and they mentioned how if they end up going to Viltrum, then they're just crap out of luck. But yeah, and that's kind of just where it is. They kind of discuss briefly, they talk about how they have video games in there. But yeah, that's all there really was for the episode story-wise. But holy smokes, this episode was so good. Like, it literally, it's peak Invincible so far. Like, it was so good, especially like Conquest and Mark fight. Like I said, literally one of the best fights in all of Invincible. I mean, like I said, I'm not a comic reader of Invincible, but so far in the animation, it's top tier. It's top tier, because like that was so cool, and that scene, like the realism of like the viscera being pulled out and all that, that was a sick scene. And all the time meticulously Conquest did it. Like, ooh, peak Bon Appetit cinema. But yeah, like I said, that entire episode was just phenomenal. And I really liked the actual personal relationship that happened in, because I like how Nolan relates it. And I like to see Nolan struggle with making up for what he's done. Like, that's probably one of the few actual like personal relationship things I like in Invincible. But yeah, that episode was creme de la creme. But yeah, that's all there really was for episode 5 of Invincible season 4. I mean, all I really have for episode 64 of Shelf Review. So thank you very much for watching.